I spend a lot of time procrastinating on YouTube, and I've tried to combat this many times, most notably through these fancy site blocking extensions. Except those don't really seem to work, at least on me, and I have a hunch that it's because simply blocking the site gives you these withdrawal cravings, I guess. So what if, instead of making an extension that blocks YouTube, we create one which makes the experience terrible? For example, it just randomly pauses the video or skips to the end just as it begins. This in turn would make you just intrinsically dislike being on YouTube. Well, at least that was the thought process behind what I've been working on. Now, while I would like to demonstrate this on a normal browsing session, I also don't want to run into copyright issues, so I'm gonna show you what the plugin does on my own video. First of all, up here you can see this blue YouTube icon. Clicking on it opens this very simplistic interface with a timer and a couple of settings. The time limit obviously sets the maximum amount of time that you can spend on YouTube per day, so, let's just bump that up to the maximum. Sometimes I hate the things that I make. The second slider is the difficulty, and that just decides how annoying the plugin will be. So let's also put that up to the max. Now that that's set up, we wait. 2 hours later, we get this very simple pop-up which warns us that from now on, the plugin is active. So let's look at everything it can do. Number 1, banner text. You open a video and instead of there being a video, there's merely a banner with a piece of text. Either an insult or a motivational statement, you can change these to your heart's desire. Number 2, random pausing and muting. Basically what the name says, and if you have maximum difficulty, it just pauses or mutes the video once a second, which makes watching basically impossible. Number 3, random skipping. And this is even worse than random pausing, the video just skips around all over the place. Number 4 is the speed change. This one is fun because while you can still watch the video, sometimes it will be going at 10% speed and other times it will be going at 400%. And finally we have link replacing. This is honestly the most fun because while it allows you to watch the current video, it affects what you'll watch next. Let's say I click on this inconspicuous video, and oh hey, guess what video it opened? Anyway, the links are also customizable, so if you have any videos you want to be redirected to, go ahead, put them here. And that's basically it. While it may seem limited, I have been using it for the past month or so, and let's just say it's quite effective, unless you switch it off. So I'm going to talk about the development process now. If you're interested in that, then please do stay. If you just want to download this, then skip to the section named Download and Customization. It should be on the timeline. So to be honest, before this I had never made a Chrome plugin ever. I had made this app script which sends me an email containing our school's lunch menu for the day. And yes, it's still going on during quarantine, which means I'm basically getting empty emails every day. Nonetheless, the basic process to getting an extension running is kinda similar. I just followed this random tutorial and it seemed to work, so that's perfect. Now, the most crucial thing I had to make was the timer. Because obviously I didn't just want to have a script which increases some value by 1 every second. No, I wanted some fancy system. So I came up with this. The script listens to different tab actions, so whether the user opens a tab or switches a tab, and when it detects that you just entered a tab that contains youtube.com in its URL, it logs that you just opened YouTube, and that log has a timestamp. Eventually, when you leave YouTube and it detects a different URL, it logs that you left YouTube, and that log also has a timestamp. So then you take these two times, subtract them, and bam, you add that to some counter, and you have the time spent on YouTube. Obviously there's an issue, and that's that there's people out there who rarely leave YouTube, and so the script logs that you entered YouTube, but since you never left, it thinks you never were on YouTube. And while I could have made some fancy way to solve this, I was already a couple of days into making this and I realized that I'm going to have to update the GUI every second anyway. So I also made that script calculate once per second if you exceeded the time limit, which isn't that effective, but oh well. With all of this done, the timer miraculously worked, well, in the console at least, because for my life I couldn't figure out why it wasn't displaying the pop-up icon here. Once again, I wasted away hours of my life working on this, modifying the manifest file, changing permissions, etc., only to realize that you're supposed to click on this puzzle thing and, pin the extension. So now that actually displayed, it took a while to make it look cool and stuff. And also, I was a bit concerned because it seemed like the plugin was slowing down YouTube a lot, but it turns out that that was just because my whole family was watching Netflix. Anyway, I had to also make the timer reset at midnight, which seems like a menial task, but for some reason it just didn't want to do it. So I redid a ridiculous amount of code just to make it work, and I also added these fancy settings which I certainly did not just copy from W3 Schools. And finally I threw together an icon, and now we're getting into the interesting part of this video, the functions that the plugin does. So in the code there's this very simple switch statement which gets called every second or so that you're over the time limit, and it randomly chooses what function to do. Some of these were easier to implement than others. For example, it's not really that difficult to pause videos or mute them, or speed them up. If you have any experience with JavaScript, you probably know that the YouTube player is just a classical HTML video player, so functions like pause, mute, and the like still work. It's also really easy to replace a video with a banner. Just replace the contents of the div that holds the video player with a piece of text. The really interesting functions though are the skips and the link replacement. Now in theory the skip isn't too complicated or amazing. The HTML video player just has an attribute called current time, and if you change that, you change the current time on which the video is. If you set that to some random value, you get this random skippy motion. The thing that intrigued me though is, if I can do this on YouTube videos, can I do it on ads? Like, can I just make a thing that skips to the end of the video if it finds out that the video is an ad? And you bet I can, which means that with like 5 lines of code you can make an ad blocker, or like ad skipper I guess. Not the most elegant one, but it works. Just an unscripted side note, does YouTube like think you watched the whole ad since it's at the end? Or like, is that a different system? Whatever. The link replacement seems trivial at first, but for some reason, running through all the links and changing the href just didn't seem to work. I did a bit of digging around, and it turns out it's because of this class here. So naturally, I removed it, and interesting. I played around with it a bit more, and eventually just made the for loop ignore every link except the videos, so that the formatting wouldn't get messed up like it did. And that worked, so great. We basically have everything done. Okay, now I would like to go on a quick tangent on the safety of Chrome plugins. And hear me out, because this is actually kind of interesting. One thing that made me really uneasy while developing this plugin was just how simple it was to do all this stuff. I literally didn't need to ask for any permissions or anything to do all these trolls. I mean, sure, I had to ask for permissions to store stuff in local storage, or send messages between scripts, but not for injecting JavaScript. Which I suppose makes sense, basically every plugin needs to inject JavaScript. But there's so much one can do with just that. Say this was your banking website. I do a quick search, find out the ID of the password box, and then one line of code and I have your password. Bit of server-side coding and I could send this to myself. So, you know, just something to keep in mind before downloading shady plugins. And obviously I don't want anyone to be unsure about the safety of my plugin, so I decided not to actually publish it or anything. Instead, there's a link in the description to the source code on GitHub. If you want to use it, you download the whole repository, then go to Chrome Extensions, choose Unpack. I don't actually know if that's what it's called. Oh, it's Load Unpack. And pick the file that you downloaded. It's as simple as that. And it also makes modifying it really easy. So if you want to change any messages or links, just go to the actions.js file, and up at the top here, there's a couple of arrays that you can edit. So you can put your custom messages here, and you can put your custom videos here. Just put a comma and add the message or link in quotation marks. To close this off, I suppose I should talk a bit about my experience so far. I actually think it works quite well. Usually when it starts annoying me, I just tell myself, well, time to do something else, I guess. Or I could play around with it and try to watch the whole video despite it pausing every second. Nah, just kidding. I don't know whether it's the fact that I've just gotten slightly bored of YouTube or the plugin also helped, but I just don't spend as much time on YouTube anymore. Now, as a closing note, ironically, I would love if you watched another one of my videos. Don't look at it as procrastination, look at it as productively spending your time watching some random guy do random side projects which may inspire you somehow. Although I only have one video so far, so. But there will be more someday. So, you know, come back. Thanks for watching.